Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Just giving a couple moments for everyone to get their audio set up. Thank you so much for being here. And welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 551st New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, the Programs Assistant here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a tribute to Mary Beth Edelson, hosted by Kat Griefen and featuring Elaine, Angelopoulos, Susan B, Christen Clifford, Meredith Donna Kessinger, Dena Muller, Guerrilla Girl Alice Neel, Gabriella Shypula, Kathleen Wentrack, and also with contributions by Roxana Fabius, Joyce, Kozloff, Lucy Lippard, Janet Olivia Henry, Alicia Smith, and Jillian Steinhauer. And we are thrilled to welcome Kay Turner here today to close the program. And before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges that Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation. And we encourage you to check the chat for a living document of resources and actions. And also over the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has brought together art, music, dance, film, theater, literature, and thoughtful social and political meditations in our monthly publication and in our public events, like here in our daily NSE. Please check the chat to donate to help support all of this amazing work and all of our operations here at the Rail. And I would also just like to note that we encourage you all to visit Mary Beth Edelson, a celebration on view at David Lewis Gallery through June 4th, 2022. We will be posting more information on this exhibit and full bios of today's guests, as well as our tribute that was published in the chat. So just keep your eye on that. And I'm so excited to announce our host today, Kat Griefen. She is an art dealer and educator. From 2006 to 2011, Kat was the director of Air Gallery, which was founded as the first nonprofit for women artists in the United States. And since 2011, Kat has been the co-director and co-owner of Acola Griefen Fine Art. She is the board member of Art Table, a member of the Council for Feminist Art at the Brooklyn Museum, a national committee member of the Feminist Art Project, and a member of the Association of Women Art Dealers. Thank you for joining us, everyone. And I'm so excited to pass the mic over to Kat.
Thank you so much. I have to also include that I teach for CUNY. I run the Gallery Museum Studies program at Queensborough Community College, not because anyone needs to hear more about me, but because we also have a wonderful chair of our department, Kathy Wentrack, speaking today. And because hopefully we have some students here learning a little more about Mary Beth Edelson than what they already probably know from some of the folks who are here. I'll share something to start from today, since we're here on a very, I think, important and rageful morning, I believe. Just before dawn this morning, I dreamed I was sitting next to Mary Beth. And as she spoke with a journalist, unable to resist, I leaned over to ask what she thought needed to be done regarding the leaked draft opinion overturning abortion rights. She turned, looked at me with her fierce face, saying, well, we're going to need to make some placards. If Mary Beth were here today, she surely would be corralling all of us to work on that and other important initiatives along these lines. And I feel like maybe with that dream from beyond this morning, she is. Mary Beth's practice is a call to action. From the time she was a teenager, she took on every injustice she encountered. Mary Beth was prolific and driven alternatively by rage and by joy. Edelson is probably best known for her collage, Some Living American Women Artists. And this is understandable given the broad impact of this work, which I proposed as a kind of proto-social network to connect and identify women artists in an earlier Brooklyn Rail article. But as we contemplate her legacy today, I propose that her work be examined not only based on her position as an originator of the feminist art movement, but as an early practitioner across many genres emerging during her times, who fearlessly took on the issues of the day and I think also of tomorrow. You'll hear today of Edelson's involvement in the civil rights movement, the feminist art movement, the movement for women-centered theology. We hear about participation in heresies, collective and her membership with AIR Gallery. And certainly, of course, Mary Beth Edelson was an organizer, initiating, for example, the first national conference for women in the visual arts as early as 1972, and later creating an international network of feminist artists pre-internet and proposing they habitate at the Centre Pompidou in Paris. This never occurred, but was fully planned. I'm grateful for Mary Beth that she had also the foresight to document her art in her communities. It has been the highlight of my career to place her archive with the Fales Library and Special Collections at New York University. And many of the images you'll see today are from her archive via a digital exhibition created by the Feminist Institute with text by art historian Kathleen Wentrack, who will also speak. Many of you knew her, so you will likely remember some of these works, but you may be less familiar with others because of her contributions across so many fields and in so many genres. For example, Rituals with My Children and Black Spring series, which demonstrated her commitment to the environment. The former were the very first of her ritual works that she described as such. And in these private performance rituals, she asked her children to connect with the earth in order to learn to consider to care for it permanently. And then in these works, the Black Spring series, she addressed in the 1980s the impact of fossil fuels. Like her AIR sisters, Anna Mendieta and Agnes Denis, Edelson also created photographs and drawings for earthworks. For her collectively planned performances, her story gathering boxes, and other works, Mary Beth also needs to be credited as an originator of participation in contemporary art or social practice. This is a theme that Akola Griefen took up in this 2013 exhibition. But thinking on her relevance in 2022, Edelson took on issues related to women in sports, domestic violence, and maybe most important today, abortion rights. Through her art-infused actions on the street, the work she did with others in the studio, and thoughtful and powerful explorations elsewhere, she fought for the rights of women and marginalized people. And on a day when we feel the need to do something, I'm grateful to Mary Beth for bringing us together. Now let's hear about one of her early and completely unplanned actions from New York Times writer Jillian Steinhauer. Staff from the Rail will be reading this and other contributions from folks who can't be with us, but wanted to share some words and some images.
So, thank you so much, Kat. I am honored to read this excerpt of her tribute from Jillian Steinhauer. My favorite story about Mary Beth Edelson didn't make it into the obituary I wrote for her in the New York Times. Her son, Nick Edelson, told it to me. In 1975, Mary Beth and her then partner, Robert Stackhouse, moved to New York City. She had sold her house in Washington, D.C. and used the money to buy a loft in Soho in one of the artist George Macuna's co-op buildings. The space was raw, in need of major work before it could be habitable. Mary Beth, Robert, an assistant, and young Nicholas set to fixing it up. One day while working, Mary Beth heard yelling and screaming coming from next door. Looking through the small holes in the sheetrock, she saw two men beating up Macunas. She started banging loudly on the door that connected the two spaces. Robert was out, so Mary Beth loudly impersonated a group of men, a phantom work crew who said they were trying to get through the door. The men who'd been beating up Macunas fled, leaving him in a pool of blood. Mary Beth was able to save him, but he had several broken ribs, needed dozens of stitches in his head, and was blinded in one eye. After he had gotten help, she returned to the pool of blood. She swirled it into mystical shapes and photographed them, turning her act of rescue into an artistic ritual before cleaning up the blood altogether. Later on, Macunas expressed his gratitude by sending Mary Beth a note and a plant. In her response, which is in the Jean Brown papers at the Getty Research Institute and was shared with me by the art historian Colby Chamberlain, she wrote, "George, your thank you letter was more than enough thanks. It is the first and only thank you for saving my life letter that I have ever received. I am beginning to like this role and am considering getting myself a white horse and some armor and becoming the first woman knight of Soho." I never knew Mary Beth, but there's something about this story that I think encapsulates who and how she was: caring, brave, and creative. She didn't hesitate to do the right thing, save a life, or the slightly weird, perhaps morbid one, making art with blood. Both actions were equally part of her. She was faithful to her own visions as an artist, but also in community and relations with others. A way of being that is, for me, the ultimate model. And that was written by Jillian Steinhauer.
Meredith?
Good afternoon, I guess, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Just wanted to make sure. So this is a video interview that Kat and I did with Mary Beth July 31st, 2008. And I was just really pleased to be there with her. She was full of wonderful energy. So here we go. Let me just hide this. That's not what I want. Okay.
I don't know that I can make the claim of being born an activist, but pretty.
One second, everybody. Having one of those days with technology.
No worries. Thanks, Meredith.
Mary Beth for Book and Rail. Why is it not showing that? Okay, here we go.
I don't know that I can make the claim of being born an activist. By the time I was 12 years old, I was organizing things, getting myself into enormous amount of trouble. The civil rights movement had not started at that time. What we had then was what we called race relations. And there was also, and I'm talking about the 50s now, deep history. In the 50s, you also had the beginnings of a peace movement. But if you talked about it in those terms, it would be McCarthy would be down on your head. My father, at one point, decided I was a pinko and told me to pack my bags and get out of the house. I think I was 12 or 13 years old. There were no halfway houses. I probably would have gone. There was any place to go. So I just learned to hide it. I was very involved with the church and the young people in the church, and it's really through the church that I got politicized. Because in the North, some of the Protestant churches were extremely liberal and very supportive of the civil rights movement to come and the peace movement, although that was not necessarily up front. But if you were active, you got deeper and deeper into those kinds of things. So as a child, in my teen years, I went to a number of conferences, and at those conferences, listening to the speakers, I got politicized, and I just became part of how I looked at things. But the second part of it doesn't seem right to me is you have to be willing to act. You can't just know it and talk about it. It's got to be out there. So I think that combination of, and also I grew up in a very blue collar steel mill town where there were a lot of strikes going on and political talk from that point of view. And that, of course, is bound to. And also it was extremely integrated in the sense of I was a minority as a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant girl. I was the minority in my town, which would not be the case around the country. We were about a third black, a third Hispanic, and most of the other people were immigrants in the town. So it was a very dynamic mix of people, and that can't help but have an effect on you. And it also gives you a tolerance of people who are not like you. In the 60s, I was very, very active in the civil rights movement. So I had honed my skills for organizing and understood how to do it and what was effective, and honed my voice into being able to speak in public and talk about issues and raise money and all the other things. Leaflet at night, which is what we used to do for the civil rights movement. A black and a white would go out together into all the neighborhoods and leaflet at night because it was dangerous to do it during the day. So, you know, you learn all of these other ways of thinking. And so when the possibility of a feminist movement began to form in my mind, the Corcoran Gallery of Art at that time put up a show, their biannual, and there were no women in it. And that was shortly after the Whitney had been picketed in New York City. And I thought after the Whitney was picketed that was wonderful, because all of the museums would understand they've been discriminating against women, and that all the doors would now fly open and we'd just be able to walk in. And of course, that didn't exactly prove out to be true, to be rather naive. So I got together a group of women in Washington, D.C., and we picketed the biannual. It got in the newspaper, and as a result of that, a few women got together and started talking, and then we decided we should have a conference, and we should have a national conference. And because I was teaching at the Corcoran, I had access to talking to the people that were there about the possibility, and they agreed to it. And it took us a year to do it. We put together the first conference for women in the visual arts. Women from the East Coast, West Coast came, the Midwest, and it was the first time that these people met each other. We had everybody from Lucy Lippard to Marcia Tucker. Alice Neel was there, Judy Chicago, Mimi Shapiro, June Wayne was there. Did I say Lucy Lippard? she deserves being mentioned twice. Yeah, so and there were 300-400 people for 3 days at this conference in the auditorium of the Corcoran.
So yeah, so again, my name is Meredith Drum, and we did that in 2008 for a documentary about the AIR gallery, but it's a longer video, and I'll post here in the chat a link to the collection on Vimeo that I have that has this one that you just listened to, as well as some other parts from this hour-long interview that we did with her, which was really great. And I'm a computer artist, so I always think that I'll never have technical problems, but for some reason today I am. And I think Mary Beth was very kind of magical, and I think maybe she's trying to tell me that she's here or something, because she was kind of like witchy, and like I don't think she means any harm, but she just wants to say hello, I guess. That's it for me.
Meredith, I love your reading of that. I think it sounds very accurate. And I also want to thank you for so generously sharing. This is a lot of video material, the link she's sharing, that no one has seen before other than Meredith. And maybe I don't think I've even seen all of it. So thank you for so generously sharing that so that people can get to know her work and her stories a little bit better. And as we heard earlier from Mary Beth in that piece, one of the people who she admired very much and who admired her very much was Lucy Lippard. So we're going to hear, apologies, here's Mary Beth messing with my tech as well. But we will hear now reading Lucy Lippard, some quotes from Lucy Lippard's piece in the Brooklyn Rail.
Thanks, Kat. Okay, Mary Beth Edelson was a dynamo, a power to be reckoned with even before feminists had much in the way of power. She found her place in the oppositional world through feminism as a member of several groups, including Heresies and Women's Action Coalition, WAC, where I knew and admired her. She instigated and was on the editorial collective of Heresies' Great Goddess issue, inspired by ancient women's rituals. Mary Beth never let her interest in the past obscure her political organizing in the present. There was never anything woozy about her justice-driven spirituality. Goddess Head, 1975, the artist's nude torso rising from rocks with an ammonite spiral as head/halo, is a classic example of her constant fusion of political rage and life-giving affirmation. Edelson noted that the spiraling head presents goddess within while she points outward to her political implications. That outward gesture can also be read as an embrace.
Susan B.
Hi. I'm going to speak a little personally about how I first encountered Mary Beth and also about her relationship to AIR. So I first saw her work at AIR's gallery's first location on 97 Worcester Street in Soho in 1977. She was invited to join AIR, the first women's cooperative gallery in the US in 1975, and remained a member till 1984. She had 4 solo shows at the gallery, and the gallery was founded in 1972 and is presently having its 50th year anniversary. And I'm also speaking as a member of the gallery for 25 years since 1997. And there's a picture of some of the early members of AIR, including Mary Beth. She was one of the most important early members, instrumental in building up the programming for the gallery, along with other members, of course, including Anna Mendieta and Nancy Spiro, who ran the Monday night series of lectures and panels. This series was an important lifeline to me personally, and other young artists, as these talks addressed political and artistic issues, especially feminist issues in the 1970s and 80s. And at the time I became aware of her work, I was a graduate student in art at Hunter College, where there were no women faculty members at all. So this was a really, AIR's programming was crucial to me and so many other younger artists at that time. Edelson participated in several events at the gallery devoted to the Great Goddess in 1976. And then more events were held at her loft on Mercer Street, where I was lucky enough to hear her and Mendieta speak. And she also exhibited some of her most important work at AIR, including memorials to the 9 million women burned as witches in the Christian era. And she started our national members program and also established the one-on-one critics program. And she was a very important believer in community. She hosted parties, gatherings, meetings, panels. Then going back one slide, I think, in 1976, on the left, you see her print, Death of the Patriarchy, which is also known as the AIR Anatomy Lesson, which was printed in a poster edition of 1,000. And it was all members of the gallery standing around this dead male. So it's a very important piece of hers. And now, many years after she's gone, the original collage is now at MoMA. So she glorified the female body and spirit, and I made a collage myself for the tribute issue. that the Rail published. And she depicted herself and other women as powerful goddesses while fighting to extend the women's movement into the art world. And I also found her very important as the founding member of the Heresies Collective, where she was active from 76 to 96. And this helped me start my own feminist-oriented magazine, Meaning, which I published for 30 years with Mira Shore from 1986. But Heresies itself was a very important influence on us. And now you can see it, it's all online, it's all been scanned. Especially her issue that she spearheaded, the goddess issue, which should be in the next slide, but which was, and the next one after that, there should be 3 slides. Yeah, this is the tribute collage I made to her, where I put the things that I thought were important, AIR, the Great Goddesses, and Heresies, which she published in 1978 and which Edelson put together. So I want to just end with a little quote from Dodie Bellamy, who wrote a really wonderful piece about Mary Beth for Art Forum, which is also in Dodie Bellamy's book, Bereaved. And she said, "When I spy one of Mary Beth's naked goddess photos, I long to reach back to a kinder, kinkier, crazier, or more naive time when sex and spirituality and politics were linked, when women painted their bodies and ran around naked together. An entire generation of women visionaries will soon be gone. It's time for their successors to stop bashing that past and to start to reimagine it." So that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. This is Kathy Wentrack here. When I first met Mary Beth at her loft, I was immediately struck by her wall collages, the genesis of which began out of a playfulness with the scraps left over from the process of making her well-known poster series. The wall collages are unique for the way they capture and celebrate the women artists, organizations, and activities that Mary Beth had been engaged with since the early 1970s. Composed in unusual vine or web-like shapes, the structures of the individual collages extends to how she installed the works collectively. In Webwork's Heresies that you see in the lower left, several photographs of each woman in the Heresies collective are pasted together to form arc-like shapes, a structure that provides visual form to the collective process of the group. Alongside and often in connection with the portrait-based wall collages, recurring themes included snakes, Medusa, Venus, ancient goddesses, Sheila Nagig, and Bao. These themes were part of a larger impulse during the period in which Mary Beth researched alternative histories and spiritualities in which women held significant positions and power. In the other example here, Snakes from Snake's Gorgon series, the artist combined images of fellow AIR members, their faces forming the strands of widely waving hair of Medusa placed on top of an image of Bao. Next, Kel. As I got to know Mary Beth and her work over the years, I was and still remain impressed by the extent of her production. I want to mention a couple of lesser known works. Mary Beth made many drawings of earthwork concepts or eco-feminist works. This was a natural interest for the artist, considering her insight to photographic performances in places such as the Grebsiva Cave in Croatia, to Reykjavik, Iceland, to the Chico Mountains in California. Related to these works and her group rituals, the drawing on the left describes elements of a ritual performance involving chanting and dancing on earth mounds, labeled Lotus Mound and Fire Mound. The other drawing proclaims to reclaim the land, with prominent blue breast-like forms on which Mary Beth wrote, "Mound shelters to be placed in the valley next to the body of the Great Mother," unquote. The forms were to cover up open uranium mines in Wyoming. Her activism was continuous. Next, Kat. Completed in 1975, Goddess Tribe consists of 13 life-size painted plywood cutouts, first exhibited in 1975 at the Henry Gallery in Washington, D.C. They were in storage for over 40 years, until they were exhibited in New York at the David Lewis Gallery in 2019. Each sculptural painting references an ancient goddess or a powerful female figure, and the space creates an atmosphere of goddesses rising, as Edelson described, and I feel like I experienced when I saw it. Quote, when the tribe surrounded you, their bonding and physical presence suggested communications, sounds, whispers, and chants, unquote. The tactile surfaces of each figure includes marks, scratches, and text, such as the words, the new sun rising, your 5,000 years are up. That's near the base on the glorious sun, anticipating Edelson's forthcoming performances, Mourning Our Lost Herstory, and the installation, Your 5,000 Years Are Up of 1977. Actually, and also just to mention, the Whitney purchased 3 of those pieces as well after this exhibition. Now, throughout her career, Edelson created numerous artist books, often unique and sometimes in parallel with other art projects, or a collection of drawings, photographs, and text related to an existing work. The Thunder Perfect Trickster is a book that captures her old friend, the trickster muse, a figure that allowed her to imagine the unimaginable for women in the 1970s. She explained, quote, the trickster makes it up as she goes along and owns her own stories, unquote. This trickster muse acts as a facilitator for Edelson, a risk-taking guardian and a troublemaker who disregards all boundaries. Another artist book includes a healing ritual for Carolee Schneemann. It's related to an event that took place in Mary Beth's loft in 1987, entitled Summer Wounds Healed in Winter. These photographs document the ritual and select pages from the artist's book that includes references to ancient goddesses as models and sources of strength for contemporary women. The last one. Mary Beth was committed to working with other feminist artists and activists, and she often celebrated her colleagues in her work, and especially in the numerous wall collages. In 2008, Edelson described the historical intention of the wall collage project to me, quote, an important aspect of these collages is commemoration. I want to honor these women who gave so much of their time in the 1970s to building the feminist movement and stuck with it, making it happen. They acknowledged that we had a revolution in the 1970s and we won the revolution and it affected the whole world and it's still affecting the whole world, unquote. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Gabriella?
Thank you so much, Kat. Mary Beth Edelson's posters illuminate the shared desire among women artists in the 1970s to create alternative histories that reflects themselves and their peers, valuing their experiences as historical. Edelson said that Some Living American Women Artists was the first form of feminist art that satisfied her. I think her process of making this poster illuminates exactly how she forged her identity as a feminist artist. She didn't know many of the women included in the poster at the time of its making, writing to women such as Louise Bourgeois to ask for images to include in this poster. However, she soon, in the year that she finishes this poster, would meet many of these women, including Alice Neel, Faith Ringgold, and others through organizing the first national conference for women in visual arts in April of 1972. Adding to Kat's reading of these posters as a feminist social network, I see these posters as offering perhaps the first visualization of new feminist historical methodologies that document and emphasize the present interwoven lives of women artists as history. Next slide, Kat. Around the same time that Edelson was developing her poster series, she also began an interactive installation titled Story Gathering Boxes. Made from thick pine with 4 square sections, the boxes hold cards with questions stamped across the top, relating to a specific theme such as motherhood, the story of your life, menstruation, researching and remembering women's history. You can see in this slide a few of the questions Edelson would prompt visitors to respond to. Edelson's stories boxes illuminate the importance of recording histories that reflect the personal experiences of her peers. She wrote, quote, I hope these boxes would come to hold the living myths of our time, the spontaneous real life stories and attitudes of a people, end quote. Next slide, Kat. Thank you. Edelson's story boxes were also an integral part to exhibitions and performance events throughout her career. And these workbook pages on this slide for memorials to the 9,000 women burned as witches in the Christian era, a performance ritual event that occurred at AAR in October 1977, Edelson is making plans for the centering table, which included a story box that prompted visitors to recall witch hunt stories. The performance grew out of Edelson's research on witch hunts and being shocked by the number of women who were killed and left out of history books. When Edelson published her poster, Happy Birthday America and Chrysalis, she addressed the importance of research on women's history to her practice. She wrote, quote, "I feel right in my gut that our history has been erased, stolen, lost, or not thought important. I'm mourning our lost history and creating in rituals a meditative oral history." Edelson's meditative oral history inspires me to reconsider what constitutes capital H history and offer new feminist historical modes that assert one's personal experiences and relationships as historical. Thank you.
So do we have Alice Neel, Guerrilla Girl Alice Neel with us? I know she's joining, but I think that she may be a little bit behind schedule. So I think what we'll do is we'll return to this a little later on because I think she may not have joined us quite yet. So I'm going to skip ahead to this reading from Janet Olivia Henry's piece for the Brooklyn Rail on Mary Beth.
I met Mary Beth when we were members of the WAC, Women's Action Coalition. The New York Times Magazine recreation of its 1993 Art World Arts All-Stars cover seemed to infuriate everyone but Mary Beth did something about it. She organized an action, also known as demonstrations, but with a lot more visual cohesion. One Saturday afternoon in 1993, a group of women artists picketed Pace Gallery on 57th Street, wearing men's attire and both prosthetic and 6-foot-long fabric male apparatus. Mary Beth was resourceful as she was proactive. Her loft in Soho became a hive of activity when signs and banners were needed for actions frequently. The other project we worked on was Combat Zone, Campaign HQ Against Domestic Violence in 1994. It combined disseminating information about where to get help, self-defense workshops, and performance night, and an installation entitled Kali Babbitt, a conflation of the Hindu goddess of war and nature and the infamous Lorena Bobbitt. Mary Beth was a wonderful artist and a great, great human being.
Donna.
Hi. Wow. Okay, I'll be quick, but can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. The photograph is of Mary Beth's loft when we did the PS1 WAC Open Studio Tour. She invited the public to her studio to come and see, and also her friends and neighbors, including like Nancy Sparrow, and I won't go through the list, but like it was a chance for us to see how they live and work and how it related to the WAC show at PS1. And that was in like 2008. And then the video we're gonna see is from 1999. And it was also transcribed in part for the art of Mary Beth Edelson. But go ahead and play it. She was a very kind and generous mentor and friend. I miss her.
Well, we had people on so many different levels. We had old warhorse politicos that had been in there who really knew the ropes. They could foretell what was going to happen if people didn't use the proper processes. You had people who were just out of school, who were never involved with any political things in school. And then you had those who saw this in very short term terms and would just do what would be an immediate gratification without thinking of the long range process that we should.
Having the people who never look up except to answer a question but do all the drudge work takes another kind of situation and is needed in other places. But you have to have either someone or somebody or a philosophy that's been developed that'll make those things, bring those things together in the way so so they can function together. I've heard people brag about not being feminist. I'm not saying in WAC. Actually, there were a couple of people in WAC who would say that under their breath. I think because of all the doctrinaire, humorless pronouncements that got a lot of airplay, people disassociate themselves from that term and from the activity. And the people who are saying that they're not feminists, it's like, how do you think the women, how do you think you got here? Because of your brains and your good, citizenship? Somebody had to kick that damn door down, and you know, because you can sashay through it doesn't mean that it did not have to be done. I mean,
when I think about my own life, you know, as a feminist, I really put a great emphasis on the notion of education, because I came from a radical home, so that part of you know, taking part in society was something I had in my family. But then I saw what could happen when people were using feminism in an extremely radical way, an immediately understood radical way. And I saw how that frightened people. That kind of confrontational positioning, it frightened people. It frightened not only men but women as well. And there was, I felt that there was more important work to do if we took people one-on-one, small groups, giving speeches to larger groups where we didn't, we gave them something to think about. And we ourselves stood for something as feminists. And I think you and I have something in common that a lot of women don't have with us, which is we were never afraid to say, I am a feminist.
And that's they still right. Were not responding.
That's right. We had done all this in the early 70s. We had picketed the Whitney because of the low number of women artists in the annual. And when we first picketed it in 1970, then it did go up from about 4% women in the Whitney annual to 25% in subsequent biennales, and subsequently it's been a little better with film and video.
The figures are still not good. You know, we have
of course they're not good.
We have done recent statistics on this and found that the best statistics from the three major museums in New York City,
right.
Whitney, Guggenheim, and MoMA, are when they have 1 in 5. 1 woman in 5. It's really a good statistic. That's only 20%.
So that has remained the same.
Interview with a woman from Vienna, and she said that piece with the extraction from your vagina, is it very painful? I said, no, really it's not painful. You have to, you know, just oil the material a little bit. And she said, oil, but could you fit it in? I said, yeah, there are ways of making it fit. You kind of practice and work on that. Then she said, but the claws. I said, the claws? Claws? What, you mean claws? Yeah, were they painful? I said, what claws? And she said, of the interior squirrel.
Oh, that's great.
So she had not seen a photograph, she had just read it. Because if you saw a photograph, it would be very clear that's not a squirrel.
Thank you so much, Donna. For those who are looking in the chat, I think we can reiterate that Mary Beth Edelson was still collaborating from beyond with those boxes on the screen that are not part of the video, but maybe she's communicating with us today instead. Elaine, pass it to you.
Thank you. Hi. I met Mary Beth first through her work and through the introduction of Corinne Robbins, who was a professor of mine at Pratt in the 80s. She used to take her students around Soho in the 80s and really prepare us for what was yet to come when we graduated. And of course, you can never be prepared for what is yet to come. But so we had the fortune of, seeing Mary Beth's work and Hannah Wilkie and Carol Lee and Nancy and the whole range, of course, Louise Bourgeois. And it was sort of overwhelming, I mean, in a way, and necessary. One of the first works that, two first works encountered was the Some Living American Women Artists, The Last Supper, which was incredible to see. And that kind of appropriation and reclaiming of an embodiment of the disciples and Christ as George O'Keeffe. I mean, it's just tremendous force to be told this is possible, and the boxes. I had seen a show at AIR when it was on Crosby Street and encountering the box piece. And I was very inspired by that. And such, I saw this repeated in kind of a practice in some of the other artists that were younger than Mary Beth, Adrienne Piper and Martha Rossler, and finding myself interested in interaction, like how an artwork could interact with the public. And this is kind of like I see that this is an early kind of intersectional, social engaging feminist practice in conceptual art that I, made some very early work with. I made a piece called Entitled Box that included some abstract drawings and then left pages open for people to participate. It was a more contemplative work. And thereafter, I was part of an AIR show about abortion and made it an interactive work of ephemera and instructions, and it's a safe sex kit and a kit that came from Planned Parenthood, components from Planned Parenthood on contraception. And this was as I was enveloping and developing as an adult, the personal politic, the activism came at hand, and there was ACT UP and WAC and WHAM, and this is the early 90s. And that's when I met Mary Beth in person, when I was in WAC. And I think the thing, we didn't work together in WAC that often, but we recognized each other as holding the thread, that kind of structure that Mary Beth felt was needed in activism amongst women and artists, a kind of thread that needed to be there to provide a structure, a ghost structure almost, through this kind of virulent and massive and pulsating action at the moment. And that's what that period was, especially in particular, I'm speaking in particular with WAC and Tandem, the Avengers and all the other different groups that existed at the same time. So there was that kindred spirit, and that's where I got to know Mary Beth thereafter. And the collages that I see and I'm reminded of, I mean, this was what is amazing and captivating, is how she reminds us that we embody the goddess, these goddess figures. We are the goddess incarnate in everyday life, and to make that happen, make these things happen every day. And of later works, I have a series of pieces called Calls to Action, where like Mary Beth, using the ephemera that have collected over the years and protest photos and sharing that. How do you share that ephemeral history to a public that's not necessarily in the arts? And how do you make it an artwork? I think these are the complexities that, I mean, she took on in a kind of more visceral way, beautiful way. And in a sense, she was an interdisciplinary artist, that those terminologies weren't necessarily applied. And she defied a lot of these things. You know, she turned modernism on its head. She turned postmodernism on its head. So, and placing faces in areas and in forms that were not necessarily there, critiquing, you know, art histories that seemed so progressive. So, she's reminding us to take things at a higher order and to be constantly ready.
Thank you, Elaine. That's a perfect way to pass on the Zoom.
Mary Beth was one of the first American women artists to have an international career, traveling widely and stirring up good trouble whenever she went. Mary Beth always carried a camera, before we all did, and she would shoot photos of everyone. Then we appeared in her art, transformed into a mythological goddess or an attendee at the Last Supper. I believe that she will have an enduring legacy.
Thank you. And I'll pass this on to Dena Muller, who's going to guide us through Mary Beth Edelson's studio. Dena.
Hi there, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to switch to screen share so that I'm able to show the Feminist Institute's 360 of Mary Beth Edelson's studio. And I wanted to say anecdotally too that I was the director of AIR Gallery from 1998 to 2005 or so. And that's how I met Mary Beth. Kat and I have talked about this a bit because that's how Kat and I know each other, is she was the director there after me. And I had done an internship with when I was a graduate student at NYU with AIR on AIR's archive. So I got to know Mary Beth's work very well through working on the archive of the gallery as a whole. And when I became the director, there was a story about Ana Mendieta in Art in America, where they didn't mention AIR as the origin for Ana Mendieta's arrival in New York, that she came to New York to be a member of AIR. And I quoted a date in my letter to the editor to correct what they had written about Ana Mendieta at 1978 that she joined the gallery. And Mary Beth contacted me to correct that it was actually 1976, and because she had invited Ana Mendieta when she met her in Iowa. And so it was a really early lesson. Kat and I were laughing about this a little bit when we talked about it. I would say Mary Beth wasn't the only person to make me cry at AIR, but she was the first person to make me cry. And I'm Scorpio Pisces rising, so it's a lot of water. I cry easily, but she was definitely a very exacting and precise person. And she was right. It was a really important lesson for me early in my work as the director at AIR and in my work with archival materials, documenting artist practice, that the importance of the dates and the relationships and the authenticity of how all of it is interconnected is really important to be accurate. So those archives, AIR's archives, are at the Fales Library now, thanks to Susan B., a member of AIR at the time, and here on the call today, I know, had organized a relationship with Fales to take on AIR's archives, and now Mary Beth's archives are also at Fales. So the project that you see here on the screen is, I currently work with the Feminist Institute, which is a digital archive project that's documenting and digitizing feminist material culture and feminist contributions to culture. And there's some opportunities that the Feminist Institute has to be what we think of as sort of a feminist first responder, when we can see that there's an archival collection that needs attention or needs documenting. So as Mary Beth was leaving her home and studio, and there was a decision made to put all of these archival materials into boxes and onto fails, we took the time to do a 360 with the Google Arts and Culture platform. It's technology you're familiar with from Google Street View, where you can navigate around a 360 view of this at a street level. They brought that same equipment inside Mary Beth's studio. And let me actually drop into the chat, if I can, the link to it, because I highly recommend that everyone, I'm not sure, oh, there, I can see the chat.
We can do that tech stuff so you can guide us if you like. Oh, you did it already.
I think I got it. Let's see how to minimize that. You can see that, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure how to close the chat.
Just press the chat again.
On it? Oh, chat, the button up here?
Yes.
It's not minimizing for some reason. Sorry about that. Maybe if I reset the...
I don't see it.
Oh, you don't see the chat open?
No.
Okay, great. That's only on my screen then. So you can see, and I really encourage everyone to go into the link and do this yourself. It's you're familiar with the technology from the way Street View works. It allows you to navigate around the studio. And this was in the days just after she had moved out and into assisted living, and the studio was as she left it. And all the things that we've been talking about throughout this call, you can see that her studio itself was an archive, and all of the materials that she was using for collage, all the things that were all of these found objects and ephemera that were a part of her practice. It's a really important way to understand, in addition to the sort of, art historical overview that gets more and more refined as we continue to study her work. This is a really important record of her studio as she left it and her practice. So Kathy Wentrack spoke earlier, but you can see that also this is a Feminist Institute project with Kathy to create an art historical context for a lot of those materials that came out of the studio. So that's also on the Google Arts and Culture platform. And I guess just to sum up, to say that, we know it's incredibly important that the historical record is accurate, and Mary Beth was a teacher for me on that point from the earliest days of my career. And I think her work is an example of it too, that it's easy to forget all the contributions of the past unless we document and study them carefully. So I'll pass it on to who's next.
Thank you so much, Dena.
Yeah.
And again, Mary Beth wants us to just see her work and think about it all afternoon. And she wants us to see everything more than once. So we have two more contributions. One read from Alicia Smith, and one I'm looking forward to very much in our last part of our program.
Yes. Alicia wrote, I was inspired by Mary Beth Edelson's ceremonies in her Goddess Head series. In this piece, I am recreating Okpanitzli, the Aztec ceremony held on the vernal equinox. These are goddesses who are supposed to remind us of sanctity in the horrifying, who are both beatific and wrathful. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Thank you. And Christen.
Hi, I'm Christen Clifford. I'm so delighted to be here, and thank you all so much for your contributions. This is so moving to me. I am going to screen share for a second. Just a couple of pictures from an action that I did called We Wish Ana Mendieta Was Still Alive. And that is how I wound up that is how I wound up meeting Mary Beth Edelson. So this was something that I did with No Wave Performance Task Force in front of Dena in Manhattan when Anna's murderer was having that big show upstate. So I met Mary Beth after that, and she had this idea. She was like, let's collaborate. Let's get a drone, and we're gonna get all like different like little Ana Mendieta's name, and we're gonna drop Ana Mendieta's name over the opening by drone. But the opening had already happened. So I did go up to the closing, and I filled, you know, those tubes for the like big confetti tubes for Chinese New Year. You can actually like rig them to take the confetti out and put something else in. So I put copies of Ana Mendieta's name in, and we did that up at Dena Beacon. And that was my collaboration with Mary Beth. Other people have talked about her amazing work, so, and how much it meant to them. And I'm just going to say that she invited me to her studio, and she offered me coffee, and she could tell I was hungover. And I was like, oh yeah, I really I need a coffee. And she said, Christen, you have to take better care of yourself. You have to. And I was like, whatever, you know, I kind of wasn't taking her seriously. And she said, Christen, no one is going to pay attention to your work until you're old. You have to take care of yourself. And she showed me her Pilates equipment and the ropes that she went on every day upside down. And it was so moving to me. And she also told me in that slide where you can see some of my work that Kat had up, this is a project of mine called Interiors, which started with an interior photograph of my vagina, but has expanded to interior photographs of people of all genders and in the vagina and anus. And I was talking to Mary Beth, and she said, and I was like, oh, essentialism. And she said, you can just reject that. And I was like, wait, what? She said, you can just reject that. And I said, I can just reject an essentialist reading of my work. I can just, and she's like, yes. Why do you have to take that in? You don't have to take that in. That's not helping you at all. And I was just like blown away. She was so helpful, like to me. You can take that. Thank you so much. And I feel like she helped me to organize myself. She helped me to, like, when I saw her archive, I was like, oh, I need to organize my stuff. She helped me consider the political activism of artists in the 70s, and many of you on this call, and to look at that, like the actual activism of that work, and see how we can learn from it today. Instead of something that's kind of more philosophical or, and to bring it to a real collective. And so I feel like we can learn from her in our current moment. And I felt like her kindness and her generosity just, like, she gave me an internal freedom to be able to make my own work. And I just, two more things. One is that I went back to the first collage I ever made, which was in high school in an art class. And it was a collage I made from art forum and art magazines that were lying around in like 1989 in my school's art center. And it was all, I made a collage of feminist artwork, and Mary Beth's work was in it, Ana Mendieta's work was in it, and I just found this recently. And so I feel like she's been with me for longer than I knew. And then in the spirit of Mary Beth's work, I already put in the chat, there is something tomorrow night that is actually free at Abrams Art Center, and that's Indigenous artist Maria Hupfield. It says like you can buy tickets, but it's not buying tickets. And then there's also something I just put in called Abortion Stories 22, and that is Friday afternoon. And this is related to Mary Beth story boxes. Cassandra Neinish is organizing for Story Corps, which collects stories and sends them to the National Archive in Washington to collect people's abortion stories. So I just want to share other people's work that means something to me, and thank you all so much. This is really, really lovely. Thank you.
Kristen, thank you so much. And we should have Guerrilla Girl joining us, Alice Neel, but she's reached out and unfortunately had a emergency. So if she cannot join us, she just wanted to, and she may still pop in, which would be great. But she wanted us to know, everyone to know, that while Mary Beth was not officially a Guerrilla Girl, she was so supportive of, she says she was so supportive of the Guerrilla Girls, and she wishes, she wanted to be with us. Alice Neel wanted to be with us today just to appreciate, to show her, support and appreciation, and also to pay tribute. So thank you for sending those words. And I think with that, I'll pass the Zoom back to the Brooklyn Rail, to Eleanor, and encourage folks to contribute if you like, if you knew her, if you have questions, post things in the chat and so forth. Thank you to all the speakers for taking your time today on a day that is so full of emotion and rage and need for action, and for keeping and making your comments so relevant too, and reminding us how relevant Mary Beth Edelson's work is and continues to be.
Thank you so much, Kat, and thank you everyone for sharing. It's been an amazing, super heartfelt afternoon, so I'm just super grateful. I wanted to open it up to audience members. If anybody has a comment or a question or something that you would like to share, just give me a little hand raise or a wave if you can. You could turn on your camera and do that, or you could use the Zoom function. Or if there's anybody that, Kat, you would like to turn to that you know is here, welcome to do that as well.
I hope we do have some other folks contributing. And I just want to, I have a couple people we reached out to in advance who said they were going to come today and they really wanted to say something. I see a couple of their names here. So I'll just maybe raise your hand or turn on your camera on. I think we have a lot of people who knew Mary Beth or have done work with her work here. So we are grateful also to all the folks who are joining us as participants. Mary Beth always tried to bring everyone who came to attend something into the room as a participant and a collaborator. So in that spirit, I don't know if Martha might want to say something, but if not, that's okay. And I see a couple other names. I know also I was very tough about the 3 minutes for all the folks, 3 to 5 minutes for all the folks who are participating, because I figured we had lots of people who wanted to contribute attending, which is maybe the case. But if there are people who are part of the panel who want to add to, I think each of us has a story about Mary Beth and then like 15 others. So feel free, Kristen, if you're one of those people, I see you shaking your head, you're more than welcome to jump in at any time.
Well, I would say that I didn't tell the story because I only had 3 minutes, but I was at the panel where Anna Minjetta and Carl Andre were speaking at, I think when they might have met then, I don't know, but it was a very spooky event because Mary Beth was showing her photos and they all fell down when Carl Andre spoke. I mean, it was, in light of what happened later to Anna, and in light of their subsequent getting together, it was, even when I think back to it, I'm like spooked. It was her Mary Beth was showing the cave goddess photos, and it was just uncanny, honestly. So I always thought that Mary Beth was a bit of a witch, frankly. She seemed to have powers, and I'm a very rational, boring person, that this really kind of, and during that time period, I was particularly skeptical of goddess things and kind of this hocus pocus stuff, sort of 70s feminism that, as far as I was concerned, had kind of gone astray. And yet this, you could just feel these powers, especially with Anna and, Carolee and, Mary Beth and some of the people that spoke on the video, Miriam Shapiro, all these people that I looked up to, they were all so powerful. So it's really great to see the celebration of her work.
Thanks, Susan. I think we'll just kind of carry on as a conversation until folks jump in. I think thinking back about some other stories and things that were really important to Mary Beth, I think she talked about Anna almost every time. I remember spending more than 10 minutes with her. So the fact that she takes up space in this conversation, I think, is very, very apt. And one of the things she was very emphatic about was kind of what the lines of feminism were and who knew who and how people, brought other people along. And she taught at Iowa State. She came as a visiting lecturer under the intermediate program Hans Breiter was running at the time, and Anna was a student there at the time, and she was part of one of these big participatory performance rituals that Mary Beth, somewhat orchestrated, coming with those kind of drawings that you saw in Kathy Wentrack's presentation, but then working with the students like Anna, who are really graduate students, artists in their own right already often, to produce these projects. So there is ones that picture Anna. You can never see her face fully, but Mary Beth says, oh, that was her in this one. They burned a corn circle together that I think was part of Anna's thinking around what they could do. They did some projects inside, and there are beautiful photographs from those collaborations. I'll also share that Kathy Wentrack and Ann Schwartz had a great program on Mary Beth's legacy this last year as part of the College Art Association. And they're wonderful speakers. Janet Henry and Diane Dwyer spoke a lot about the really important project in that moment in the 80s, those moments in the 80s and 90s with so much pushback against feminism and so much backlash, when Mary Beth initiated through Creative Time the Combat Zone Project, which was a safe space teaching against domestic violence, self-defense workshops. Before that was really very common, behind a shoe store, so that women could go in who maybe were experiencing domestic violence, could look as if they were purchasing shoes and go into this whole incredible installation.
I was just going to add to that and say that I teach at the New School now, and I just had somebody come in and do a self-defense workshop with my students, and to teach them of their own internal power. And from what I can see with my students, and I'm sure other people are teaching as well, that there's a sense that it's like easy to be angry. And I know this of myself, like I feel very comfortable being angry. I actually feel less comfortable finding the power in myself and just sitting back with that. And I think that is something that Mary Beth was really expressing in her work all of the time, that power was always there. And I feel like some of the young people really need to see that and hear that again. And I don't think it's coincidental that there's kind of like a rise in popularity of witchcraft at this time also. So she's influenced me a lot, Mary Beth has.
I think she'd also want us to know kind of some of these practical contributions that she was making, right? And when I think about what Susan presented about her involvement with AIR, which was excellent, I also think that Mary Beth talked about how important it was to create networks, and that in 1981, she was one of the main artists at AIR to instigate the National Artist Network, which sounds today like network of national people. How that's not complicated, that's obvious. But we're talking pre-internet, we're talking pre-proto, whatever. So that idea of bringing together women in, she thought, not just city centers, but in any location, making art, doing feminist work, to bring them, to give them opportunities in New York and to connect with people in New York and back and forth, and then doing that even internationally. I think she felt really proud of that contribution, and that program continues at AIR since.
I don't want to be a downer, but realistically, I was really impressed by what Christen said about her saying to you that you have to be in good shape, because she did get Alzheimer's at the end of her life. And I think at the time when she was receiving the most recognition for her work, her work was being collected by MoMA and so forth, and she won this big award, feminist award. She did not know she was getting these awards. And unfortunately, I've seen this with too many women artists, that they get to age 80 or 90 and they no longer can really appreciate all the attention they're getting or all the positive things that are happening. It was particularly tragic with Emma Amos, who after posthumously is being incredibly put forward. But because of her Alzheimer's, she actually, and of course she died, but she didn't realize that it was happening. So what I think to myself at age 70, like, gosh, I got to get to age 90. I better do my Pilates. I got to get to those push-ups.
Susan, I think you make an important point about really being honest about what happens with health, and women talking about health in early life and later life, and in maternal health, all of these things. And I'm going to pass it on to Kathy, because actually, I think you and other folks may be pleased to know that a group of us on this call actually did go out to visit her and brought her award physically, her articles, and a lot of the things that she achieved to be able to make sure she experienced that. So Kathy?
Yeah, thank you, Kat. And yes, a few of us, including Kat and Kathleen Landy from the Feminist Institute, and I went to see Mary Beth, and we brought her the award that she had won, and we read some of the things that had been written about her. And at one point, she looked up, and you saw the Mary Beth twinkle in her eye. And she said, just when you thought everyone forgot about you. And she knew in that moment that she got that award. So I wanted to share that with you. It was touching.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy. And thank you everyone for your comments. I'm now very excited to turn to Kay Turner, our closing performer today. Artist Kay Turner works across disciplines, including performance, writing and music, exhibition curation, and public and academic folklore. She co-founded Girls in the Nose, a lesbian feminist rock punk band that anticipated Riot Girl. Kay met Mary Beth in 1976 while both were working on the Heresy's Goddess issue, and then published some of Edelson's work in Lady Unique Inclination of the Night, the journal that Turner founded in 1976 to explore art and the history of the goddess. Kay, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so thrilled to turn the mic over to you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate being here today. What an amazing woman Mary Beth Edelson was, and what an outrageous feminist, and what she accomplished in her life as an artist and a feminist is something that I think we've been brought together here to celebrate, but also to carry forward. And I think, I met Mary Beth in 1976, and we were working on the goddess issue, and I was also publishing Lady Unique, and Mary Beth was very, very supportive of that project. We were all doing what we thought was the best thing and to bring an end to patriarchy. It was a big job, and we took it on, and we thought that it was something that we actually could do. And Mary Beth and I shared a Protestant church-based upbringing where we had recently in our lives, you know, thrown off the church and discovered the goddess, and were raring to go. So I wanted to start out by, so this, I didn't have a screen share for you, but this is the first edition of Lady Unique, Inclination of the Night, published in 1976. And Mary Beth contributed a kind of manifesto to the first issue called Speaking for Myself. And I think many of the speakers today have already, to a certain extent, made this clear in terms of the goals that Mary Beth had for herself and for her artwork. But I'll just quote her here. The ascending archetypal symbols of the feminine unfold today in the psyche of modern every woman. They encompass the multiple forms of the great goddess. Reaching across the centuries, we take the hands of our ancient sisters. The great goddess, alive and well, is rising to announce to the patriarchs that their 5,000 years are up. Hallelujah, here we come. That was Mary Beth. Hallelujah, here we come, right? And so I kept up with Mary Beth. I saw her. I was living in Texas at the time, getting my PhD in folklore and performing there. But anytime I came to New York, I came over to the studio and hung out with Mary Beth. And the thing about Mary Beth, and I'm sure anyone in the room who knew her will testify, is that, you know, once you got going in a conversation with her, there was tremendous laughter. You know, she had an amazing laugh. It was, you know, she laughed loud and hard, and she laughed with a trill in her laugh, and she laughed with a deep guffaw. So Mary Beth really understood the power of laughter as much as she understood the power of serious work. So I wanted, I came back to New York in 1998 and saw Mary Beth a number of times. And she was in 2014 about to do a show in Quimper in Brittany, in France. It was a show that was curated by a wonderful young woman in France named Kathleen, and the show was called The Witch's Hour. And so Mary Beth asked me to do a performance with her on the witch figure as part of the show for the opening of this exhibition. Mary Beth was showing, I think for the first time in many years, if I'm not forgetting, she was showing the 9 million women burned, the fire ladder with the story boxes. And it had taken quite a bit to get that, you know, monumental piece of artwork over to France, and lots of worries and things like that that she and I talked about at the time. But it went well, it got installed, and we were to travel together to go and do this performance. So this was April of 2014, and Mary Beth was just beginning to decline. She was having moments of separation where things that she didn't understand, ways that she was, you know, sort of beginning the process of leaving us. And in the end, she could not travel. So I went and did the ritual alone with her invoked throughout in the process. And one thing that Mary Beth and I had talked about, you know, when we were planning for this ritual, there, you know, as as I'm sure you understand, 1,000 ideas rain down, and we talked about doing lots of different kinds of things. And one thing I had mentioned to her that I thought might be fun to do and sort of meaningful in terms of both the theme of the exhibition and also in terms of what we take away from the persecution of witches in the 14th, 15th, and 16th century. How do we turn that around? And I sang for her a song that I had written for my band, Girls in the Nose, called Medusa. And she loved that song. And in the end, it didn't come up in the actual performance that I wound up doing in Mary Beth's name in France that year. But I thought I would end by reciting it to you all as kind of a lyrical poem. And don't be too surprised if I might break out in song, but we didn't really test the audio on that. But there's a part of this song that you'll get the hang of it as soon as I start. And please do feel free to join in as a testimony to Mary Beth Edelson. Let me hear Medusa laugh. Ha ha, ha ha, ha ha. Let me hear Medusa laugh. Ha ha, ha ha, ha ha. Let me hear Medusa laugh. Let me see her face. Let me hear Medusa laugh. Snakes fall down like lace. Let me hear the sirens sing. Let me hear their voice. Take me to their island. Take me there by choice, because I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I am not afraid. Take me down the Sibyl's hole. Let the smoke rise up. I accept her prophecy. I drink from her cup, because I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I am not afraid. You were wrong about the myth. Medusa's smile gives me a lift. And the siren song, well, don't you know, I will sing along, because I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I am not afraid. Ha ha, ha ha, ha ha, ha ha. That's Mary Beth. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to be part of today. We really appreciate it. I loved Mary Beth a lot.
Thank you so very much, Kay. That was amazing. A truly perfect ending to the event, I would say. I would like to just once again thank all of our incredible guests here, all of our participants. Kat, of course, with the wonderful slideshow. Elaine, Susan, Christen, Meredith, Donna, Dena, Guerrilla Girl, Alice Neel, even though she couldn't make it today. Gabriella, Kathleen, and then also Roxana, Joyce, Lucy, Janet, Alicia, and Jillian for their contributions. We would also like to thank our extended friends at AIR Gallery for helping to make today's event possible. And we encourage everyone to view our archive of our NSE conversations on our YouTube channel, where today's conversation will be uploaded very shortly. You can also, if you're available, please join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for our 84th Radical Poetry reading, featuring PJ Clark, Lightal Shaw, and Mia Yu, with an introduction by Joaquin Pizarro. And yeah, I'm so grateful that everyone could join us today. I'll invite you all now to just turn on the microphones to say hello and goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Great day. Great day.
Thank you. Thanks for posting
Thanks so
everything
much.
that you all posted. That was great.
Thank you for the fun.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Kat, for all of this.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Kat. Yeah.
It was wonderful. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Kat.
At
Thank you, it was
Right.
wonderful.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. Brooklyn Rail. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay, for that.
Thank
reading.
You're totally welcome.
We are not afraid.
We are not afraid.
That's right. We're not afraid. Ah.
I'm gonna go make a sign, I think, that says we are not afraid.
Perfect.
For
That's
We need, to
right.
bring, we need to
Uh-huh.
bring the song out for the marching that's going to happen today at 5 o'clock.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Bring
right.
it on.
That's right. Good idea.
I'll see you in the
Thank you all. This was a great, great thing, and an amazing coincidence that it happened on such a
It did.
powerful, meaningful day for all of us. You
Yeah.
know, something has broken, and it's also broken open. So that's
Yeah.
Mary Beth.
Thanks, Kay.
Thank you.
Mwah, mwah. Bye.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.